without ever learning how wealth is actually built. And there is a difference, a dangerous difference, because money can disappear overnight. But wealth is a machine, a code, a system. And in this audiobook, the 1% Code, how wealth is really built, you're going to discover why some people stay financially exhausted no matter how hard they work, while others quietly build freedom behind the scenes without looking richer, louder, or more impressive than everyone else. You will learn why discipline matters more than motivation, why attention has become the most expensive currency in the modern world, why the wealthy think differently about time, why emotional control creates financial power, why most people are unknowingly trapped inside a system designed to keep them reacting instead of building, and most importantly, you will understand the invisible behaviors that separate consumers from creators, workers from owners, noise from leverage. This audiobook is not financial advice. It is psychological advice. Because before wealth changes your bank account, it changes your identity. And that is the part nobody teaches. Here is the truth most people avoid hearing. The world does not pay you based on how tired you are. It pays you based on how valuable you become. That sentence alone can change your life. Because millions of people wake up every morning already emotionally defeated. They drag themselves into jobs they hate. They spend money to escape stress they created from lifestyles they cannot afford. They scroll through other people's lives at midnight while silently wondering why they feel behind. And slowly, without realizing it, they become addicted to survival. That is the invisible prison. Not poverty, not lack. Survival thinking. The belief that life is only about making it to Friday. The belief that exhaustion is normal. The belief that being busy means being productive. The belief that external success automatically creates internal peace, but the 1% think differently. They understand something the average person ignores. Wealth is not built in public. It is built in silence, quiet investments, quiet habits, quiet emotional control, quiet consistency. The world celebrates visible luxury, but true wealth often looks boring in the beginning. And that is why most people never build it, because they want evidence too early. They plant seeds in the morning and dig them up at night wondering why nothing grew. But wealth hates impatience. Wealth rewards identity. Look carefully at the modern world. Everyone wants faster results, faster money, faster followers, faster validation, faster success. But speed without structure creates collapse. That is why so many people look successful online while privately drowning in debt, anxiety, distraction, and emotional chaos. They build appearance before foundation, and appearance is expensive, especially in 2026. Today, people finance lifestyles they cannot emotionally sustain. They buy status to hide insecurity. They buy luxury to escape emptiness. They consume because they do not know how to create. And the algorithm profits from their confusion. Every notification steals focus. Every comparison weakens identity. Every distraction delays mastery. This is no longer just a financial battle. It is a war for attention. And whoever controls their attention eventually controls their future. That is part of the 1% Code. The wealthy are not simply better with money. They are better with energy, better with focus, better with delayed gratification, better with emotional regulation. While most people react emotionally to life, the 1% respond strategically. That difference changes everything. Imagine two people earning the same amount of money. One spends every stressful day searching for escape. The other spends every stressful day building systems. 5 years later, their lives no longer resemble each other. One became dependent on income. The other became independent through ownership. Same starting point, different mindset, different identity, different code. And maybe right now you feel behind. Maybe you wasted years distracted. Maybe you made financial mistakes. Maybe fear controlled your decisions. Maybe you spent too much time trying to impress people who were never building anything themselves. But listen carefully. Your past financial behavior is not your permanent identity. It is training. And training can change. Because wealth is learned behavior, not luck, not genetics, not magic. Behavior that should give you hope. The first step is understanding one brutal truth. Most people are unconsciously programmed to consume. From childhood, they are taught to follow instructions. Go to school, get approval, get a safe job, stay realistic, avoid risk, wait 40 years, retire exhausted, and hopefully enjoy life before your body breaks down. But nobody asks the deeper question. What kind of life are you building while waiting? Because if freedom only arrives at the end, was it freedom at all? The 1% ask different questions. How do I buy back my time? How do I make my skills valuable? How do I build systems instead of dependence? How do I create leverage instead of exhaustion? How do I stop surviving and start designing? That is the code. And once your mind sees it, you cannot unsee it. You begin noticing patterns everywhere. You notice how emotional spending destroys long-term peace. You notice how entertainment addiction quietly kills ambition. You notice how most people spend years talking about goals instead of building habits. You notice how discipline creates self-respect. You notice how silence often contains more power than constant explanation. And slowly, your relationship with money changes because money stops being emotional. It becomes strategic. The average person uses money to impress strangers. The wealthy use money to purchase freedom. Those are completely different games. One creates temporary attention, the other creates permanent options. And options are real wealth. The ability to say no. The ability to leave toxic environments. The ability to protect your peace. The ability to choose how you spend your mornings. The ability to think clearly without panic, controlling every decision. That is wealth, not just numbers. Freedom of mind, freedom of time, freedom of emotional space, but freedom demands responsibility. That is the part social media rarely shows. Everyone wants freedom. Few people want the discipline required to sustain it. Because discipline feels invisible at first, nobody claps when you wake up early. Nobody applauds your consistency. Nobody celebrates your restraint. Nobody notices when you invest instead of consume. But years later, everybody notices the results. That is why the 1% become dangerous over time. Compounding, that is the real superpower. Small habits repeated long enough become identity, and identity creates destiny. A single hour invested daily into learning valuable skills can completely alter your future. One disciplined financial decision, repeated consistently, can transform generations after you. One controlled emotional response can prevent years of regret. One focused season can separate you permanently from average thinking. But average culture hates long-term thinking. It wants dopamine now, validation now, results now. The algorithm trains impatience. The wealthy train endurance. And endurance wins, always. If this message resonates with you, Let this audiobook become more than entertainment. Let it become a contract with yourself, a decision, a reset. And while listening, ask yourself one uncomfortable question. Am I building a future or merely escaping the present? Because your answer changes everything. Chapter 2 begins with a truth most people never realize until it is too late. Poor people work for money. The 1% make money work for identity. And once you understand that distinction, you begin seeing the hidden architecture behind wealth itself. Dear friend, you are definitely on the right track if you are watching this video. Like, subscribe, and write in the comments which topic or problem concerns you the most. We promise to prepare a professional video explanation at your request. Chapter 2. The identity that attracts wealth. Most people think wealth begins in the wallet. It doesn't. Wealth begins in identity. Before the money arrives, the mindset arrives. Before ownership appears externally, ownership must exist internally. And that is where most people lose the game before they even begin. Because they want millionaire results with employee habits. They want financial peace while emotionally addicted to chaos. They want freedom while refusing responsibility. And life does not reward contradiction. It exposes it. That is why the 1% focus obsessively on identity, not image, identity. There is a massive difference between the two. Image is what people see. Identity is what controls your behavior when nobody is watching. Image buys luxury cars to impress strangers. Identity builds assets quietly for 10 years. Image needs applause. Identity needs progress. Image wants to look rich. Identity wants to become unshakable. And the frightening truth is this: most people are performing success instead of building it. That is why they stay exhausted. Because performance is expensive. You were never designed to carry a fake identity forever. Eventually, the pressure cracks you. That is why some people look successful online but feel empty, alone at night. Because deep down, they know something terrifying. They built a life designed for attention, not alignment. And misalignment drains energy. The 1% understand this early. They know wealth is not merely a financial journey. It is an emotional transformation. You cannot build an abundant life with a desperate mind. You cannot create peace while addicted to comparison. You cannot sustain wealth if your emotions sabotage your decisions. That is why emotional mastery matters more than income. A calm mind makes better financial decisions. A disciplined mind avoids impulsive destruction. A focused mind compounds progress. A distracted mind compounds regret. Look around carefully. Most people are emotionally manipulated every day. Manipulated into buying. Manipulated into reacting. Manipulated into outrage. Manipulated into distraction. The average person wakes up and immediately gives their attention away. Notifications, messages, news, drama, comparison, noise. By 9 a.m., their nervous system is already overloaded, and then they wonder why they feel mentally exhausted before the real day even begins. The wealthy protect their focus differently, because focus is leverage. Where attention goes, identity follows. And where identity goes, behavior follows. That is the hidden chain. Behavior repeated consistently becomes your financial future. That is why the 1% are selective about environment, selective about information, selective about energy, selective about people. Not because they think they are better than everyone else, because they understand contamination is real. Spend enough time around complainers, and ambition begins shrinking. Spend enough time around victims, and accountability disappears. Spend enough time around distraction, and discipline becomes painful. Environment silently programs identity, and identity silently shapes destiny. A young man in Singapore spends every evening learning AI automation, while his friends spend every evening escaping reality through entertainment. 5 years later, they no longer recognize each other. One built leverage, the other built distraction, tolerance. Same city, same economy, different identity. A woman in Nigeria starts investing small amounts consistently while learning communication skills online after work every night. Her co-workers laugh. They spend every paycheck immediately. Years later, she owns freedom while they still rent emotional survival. Different identity. A father in Brazil wakes up 1 hour earlier every morning for 7 years. No applause, no viral moments, no dramatic breakthrough, just consistency. Reading, learning, building systems, controlling emotions, protecting focus. 7 years later, his children inherit a completely different life trajectory. That is how wealth is truly built. Quietly, repeatedly, without needing validation every step. The problem is modern culture rewards visibility more than substance. People now confuse being seen with being valuable. But visibility without value eventually collapses. That is why so many people experience emotional burnout, chasing lifestyles they cannot sustain psychologically. The 1% know something important. The goal is not to look powerful. The goal is to become difficult to break. That changes how you live. Suddenly, sleep matters, health matters, peace matters, focus matters. Your nervous system matters, because burnout destroys clarity, and clarity creates wealth. You see, most financial mistakes are emotional mistakes first. Impulse spending, revenge spending, insecurity spending, lifestyle inflation, panic decisions, fear-based investments. Emotional exhaustion creates expensive behavior. That is why inner stability becomes financial leverage. And nobody teaches this in school. Schools teach information. Rarely emotional intelligence, rarely self-awareness, rarely discipline, rarely focus management, rarely attention control. Yet these are the exact skills shaping modern wealth in 2026. Because today, information is cheap. Attention is expensive. The people who can focus deeply without constant distraction now possess an unfair advantage. And that advantage compounds yearly. Think about what happens to most people every day. Their mind becomes fragmented. A notification interrupts concentration. A video interrupts reflection. A trend interrupts direction. And slowly they lose the ability to think long-term. Everything becomes reactive, immediate, emotional, urgent. But wealth requires depth, patience, reflection, strategic thinking. That is why silence feels uncomfortable for many people now. Because silence forces self-confrontation, and self-confrontation is where transformation begins. The 1% spend time alone intentionally, not because they hate people, because they need clarity. They need space to think, space to evaluate, space to plan, space to reset emotionally. The average person avoids silence because silence reveals unresolved truths. The wealthy use silence to sharpen direction. That is a massive difference. Ask yourself honestly. When was the last time you sat alone without distraction long enough to hear your real thoughts? Not music, not scrolling, not entertainment, just clarity. Because clarity changes lives. Many people are not actually confused. They are overstimulated, and overstimulation destroys identity. The wealthy simplify. That is another secret. They reduce unnecessary chaos. They reduce emotional leakage. They reduce impulsive environments. They reduce distractions pretending to be opportunities. Because every unnecessary yes costs focus, and focus compounds into results. One focused year can alter your entire future, but most people never experience focused years, only fragmented months. The 1% code requires something difficult. You must become emotionally strong enough to look boring temporarily. While everyone else performs urgency, you build foundations. While everyone else seeks attention, you seek mastery. While everyone else consumes endlessly, you create intentionally. And yes, at first it feels lonely, because transformation changes your relationship with average behavior. You stop enjoying meaningless conversations. You stop needing constant validation. You stop explaining your goals to people committed to misunderstanding them. You stop trying to impress people whose lives secretly exhaust them. And slowly, you become calmer, sharper, more intentional. That calmness becomes magnetic, not loud confidence, grounded confidence, the kind that does not panic easily, the kind that understands delayed gratification, the kind that sees opportunities while others only see obstacles. And opportunities are often invisible to emotional minds. Fear hides possibilities. Discipline reveals them. That is why emotional control is a wealth skill. One emotional decision can destroy years of progress. One disciplined decision can change generations. You are always one identity shift away from a completely different future. Remember that. Not one lottery ticket, not one viral moment, one identity shift. Because once identity changes, behavior changes. And once behavior changes repeatedly, life changes. The frightening part is this. Most people wait for external evidence before changing internally. The wealthy reverse it. They change internally first, before results appear, before applause arrives, before proof exists. That is faith combined with discipline, and that combination becomes unstoppable over time. If this chapter hits something deep inside you, pause and reflect on this sentence carefully. Your future is hiding inside your repeated behaviors, not your intentions, not your wishes, your repeated behaviors. That realization can either scare you or liberate you. Because if behavior built your current life, behavior can rebuild your next one. And in the next chapter, we are going to uncover one of the most dangerous traps in modern society. Why most people stay financially dependent because they confuse income with wealth. And once you understand the difference, you will never look at work, money, or freedom the same way again. Chapter 3. The Income Trap. There is a trap so common, so socially accepted, that millions of people walk into it without ever realizing they are slowly sacrificing their freedom. It is called the income trap. And the dangerous part is this. From the outside, it often looks successful. Nice apartment, expensive car, luxury vacations posted online, designer clothes, a high-paying career, but beneath the surface, stress, dependence, pressure, exhaustion. Because income alone is not wealth. Income is temporary. Wealth is sustainable. And if your entire life collapses the moment you stop working, you do not own freedom. You own a sophisticated form of survival. That sentence hurts some people. But truth is supposed to wake you up. Look carefully at modern society. Many people spend decades increasing income without increasing ownership. Their lifestyle grows faster than their assets. Their expenses grow faster than their peace. And eventually, they become trapped by the very image they worked so hard to create. The 1% understand something most people ignore. The goal is not to earn more forever. The goal is to need less emotional dependence on earning. That changes everything, because once your identity becomes attached to constant consumption, freedom disappears. You become emotionally chained to maintaining appearances, and appearances are hungry. They never stop demanding more. A bigger house, a newer car, a more impressive vacation, a more expensive lifestyle, and the terrifying part, most people do not even enjoy these things deeply anymore. They consume automatically, emotionally, habitually, like people drinking salt water while wondering why they remain thirsty. The wealthy think differently. When money enters their life, the first question is not, "What can I buy?" It is, "What can I build?" That single shift separates consumers from creators. Consumers spend to feel temporary emotion. Creators deploy resources strategically. Consumers chase relief. Creators chase leverage. Consumers seek status. Creators seek ownership. That difference compounds for decades. A software engineer in Germany earns a high salary, but upgrades his lifestyle every single year to match his increasing income. Luxury watches, luxury apartment, luxury habits. Everything looks impressive, but privately, he cannot stop working. His expenses own him. Meanwhile, another engineer earning slightly less spends years building digital products, investing consistently, and controlling lifestyle inflation. 10 years later, one still rents identity through appearances. The other owns options. That is the income trap. And society rewards it because consumption fuels economies. Nobody profits from teaching you restraint. Nobody profits from your discipline. Entire industries survive by keeping people emotionally impulsive. Think about advertising carefully. It rarely sells products. It sells identity. Buy this and feel important. Buy this and feel admired. Buy this and feel enough. But emotional emptiness cannot be permanently solved through consumption. That is why people keep buying. They are searching for identity externally instead of building it internally. The 1% code requires emotional independence from status addiction. Because status addiction creates terrible financial decisions. People finance lifestyles to impress people who are secretly struggling too. That is modern culture. Comparison has become a business model, and social media intensified it. Today, someone can wake up feeling grateful, then lose peace within 60 seconds of scrolling. Suddenly, their life feels smaller. Their progress feels slower. Their identity feels insufficient. And emotional insecurity creates financial recklessness. That is why protecting your mind matters financially. Your attention influences your spending. Your environment influences your standards. Your emotional state influences your decisions. The wealthy know this. That is why many of them disappear from unnecessary noise. Not because they lack ambition, because they value clarity. You cannot think strategically while emotionally overstimulated. And overstimulation has become normalized. Most people no longer know how to sit quietly. No phone, no entertainment, no distraction, just thought. That inability becomes dangerous because reflection creates correction. Without reflection, years disappear unconsciously. Wake up, work, consume, escape stress, repeat. And suddenly someone is 50 years old wondering where their life went. The 1% interrupt this cycle intentionally. They audit their habits, audit their spending, audit their energy, audit their relationships, audit their attention, because small leaks sink large ships, and most financial collapse begins with emotional leakage long before money disappears. Stress spending, impulse upgrades, lifestyle addiction. People trying to emotionally reward themselves for surviving lives they secretly hate. That is not wealth, that is sedation. Real wealth creates breathing room, the ability to think clearly, the ability to choose intentionally, the ability to walk away from environments damaging your peace. That is why ownership matters more than appearance. Ownership buys freedom repeatedly. Appearance rents validation temporarily. One appreciates, the other depreciates. The wealthy understand assets deeply. Assets are not only investments. Assets are anything producing value consistently. Skills are assets. Systems are assets. Strong relationships are assets. A healthy reputation is an asset. Attention control is an asset. Your body is an asset. Your mind is an asset. And perhaps most importantly, your ability to solve problems calmly is an asset. Because in every economy, problem solvers rise. Complainers stagnate. That is timeless. A distracted society creates extraordinary opportunities for focused people. Read that again, because it may become more true every year. Most people today are mentally fragmented. Their attention span weakened, their patience weakened, their emotional resilience weakened, but the people who can still focus deeply, still think long-term, still build patiently, still regulate emotion, they become rare, and rare skills become valuable. That is why the future belongs to disciplined minds, not merely intelligent minds. Discipline consistently outperforms talent over long enough periods. A talented, distracted person often loses to an average, focused person because consistency compounds, while inconsistency resets progress repeatedly. The wealthy know this emotionally. That is why they respect routines, not because routines are exciting, because routines reduce chaos. And chaos is expensive, financially, mentally, emotionally. Most people underestimate how much emotional chaos affects money. Lack of sleep affects decisions. Stress affects discipline. Toxic environments affect focus. Poor health affects consistency. Everything connects. The 1% understand wealth holistically. They do not separate financial life from emotional life. They know a burned-out nervous system eventually creates burned-out decisions, and burned-out decisions become expensive. That is why inner peace is productive. A calm person sees clearly. A reactive person destroys opportunities emotionally. Imagine two investors during economic uncertainty. One panics emotionally and sells everything from fear. The other remains calm, strategic, informed. Years later, one remembers pain. The other remembers opportunity. Same market, different emotional control, different outcome. The income trap keeps people trapped in short-term thinking because they become terrified of losing immediate comfort. But long-term freedom often requires temporary discomfort, temporary restraint, temporary sacrifice, temporary invisibility. The wealthy accept this early. The average person resists it emotionally. And resistance delays transformation. Here is something powerful to remember. Every luxury you cannot maintain peacefully is a liability disguised as success. Peace matters. More than appearance, more than performance, more than external approval, because eventually exhaustion collects its debt. The 1% code is not about becoming obsessed with money. It is about becoming difficult to control. That is real freedom. A person who needs constant validation is controllable. A person drowning in debt is controllable. A person addicted to appearances is controllable. A person emotionally dependent on approval is controllable. But a person who controls desires, controls attention, controls emotions, controls spending, that person becomes powerful quietly, and quiet power lasts longer than loud attention. If this chapter challenged you, good. Growth often begins with discomfort. Ask yourself honestly, am I building assets or decorating dependence? That question can change the next 20 years of your life. Because in the next chapter, we are going to uncover why time, not money, is the real currency separating the wealthy from everyone else. And once you understand how the 1% think about time, you will never waste it casually again. Hey there, we want to remind you that we often choose topics suggested by you, our viewers, in the comments. In the comments, you can suggest a topic or ask a question about what you'd like to see in our video. We read every comment carefully, so we promise not to miss a single one. Thank you. Let's keep going. Part 5, Chapter 5. Emotional control creates financial power. Most people think wealth is built through intelligence, but history keeps proving something different. Many intelligent people remain broke. Many talented people remain inconsistent. Many gifted people destroy their own progress emotionally, because intelligence without emotional control becomes self-sabotage. And the 1% understand this deeply. That is why emotional mastery sits quietly underneath almost every form of lasting success. A person who cannot control impulses will eventually damage opportunities. A person who cannot control ego will eventually damage relationships. A person who cannot control fear will eventually abandon potential. A person who cannot control distraction will eventually lose direction. Everything connects. The average person reacts emotionally to life. The wealthy train themselves to respond strategically. That distinction creates entirely different futures. Look carefully at modern society. People buy emotionally, speak emotionally, quit emotionally, post emotionally, invest emotionally, destroy relationships emotionally. Most people do not make decisions from clarity. They make decisions from temporary feelings. And temporary feelings create permanent consequences. One angry sentence can destroy trust. One impulsive purchase can create years of debt. One emotional reaction can close doors permanently. That is why emotional discipline matters more than motivation. Motivation changes daily. Emotional stability creates consistency, and consistency compounds. The 1% know this. That is why many wealthy individuals appear calmer under pressure, not because they never feel emotion, because they trained emotional response. There is enormous power in staying calm while others panic. A calm person sees solutions. A reactive person only sees danger, and in moments of chaos, emotional control becomes leverage. Think about financial markets during fear. Most people panic emotionally. They sell from fear. They freeze from uncertainty. They react to headlines instead of principles. But disciplined minds often recognize opportunity where emotional minds only recognize pain. That is why wealth transfers during emotional periods. Calm people acquire assets while emotional people abandon them. This pattern repeats throughout history endlessly. And it exists outside money too. In relationships, in business, in leadership, in communication. The person controlling emotions usually controls direction. That is real power. Not loudness, not dominance. Control. The average person believes emotional control means suppressing feelings. It does not. Suppression creates explosions later. Emotional mastery means awareness, observation, pause, choice. The ability to feel emotion without becoming enslaved by it. That changes everything. Because emotions are temporary weather. Identity is climate. One bad moment does not define you unless repeated unconsciously. But most people repeat emotional patterns automatically because they never slow down enough to examine themselves. That is why self-awareness is a wealth skill. You cannot change patterns you refuse to observe. Many people sabotage their future from emotional habits formed years earlier. Fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of being misunderstood, fear of looking foolish, and fear quietly destroys more dreams than lack of ability ever will. The 1% train themselves differently. They understand discomfort is often the price of expansion. That is why they become willing to look inexperienced temporarily, willing to fail publicly sometimes, willing to start before feeling ready. Because waiting for perfect emotional certainty delays growth endlessly. Confidence rarely arrives before action. It usually arrives after repetition, after survival, after proof earned through experience. That is why courage matters more than comfort. Comfort keeps people emotionally safe, but financially stagnant. The wealthy understand growth often feels emotionally inconvenient. Learning new skills feels frustrating. Building businesses feels uncertain. Investing feels uncomfortable initially. Discipline feels difficult at first. But temporary discomfort creates long-term strength. Avoided discomfort creates long-term weakness. That is the trade. And life always collects payment eventually. One payment happens now through discipline. The other happens later through regret. Choose carefully. A young woman in India starts creating educational content online despite fear of criticism. At first, nobody watches. She feels embarrassed. Doubt grows. Comparison attacks her confidence. But she continues. Slowly, she improves communication, confidence, skill, strategy. Years later, the same courage that once felt uncomfortable becomes freedom. Why? Because she trained emotional endurance. Another person never starts because fear of judgment controls them. Years pass, nothing changes. That is how emotional patterns quietly shape financial futures. The 1% know emotional resilience is an asset. A person who can stay focused despite temporary emotions becomes dangerous over time. Because emotions always fluctuate, some mornings motivation disappears, some seasons feel uncertain, some failures feel painful. But disciplined people continue anyway, and continuation creates separation. Most people overestimate intensity and underestimate consistency. One emotional burst of motivation means little without repeated action. The wealthy trust systems more than moods. That is why routines matter. Routines reduce emotional negotiation. You stop asking yourself every day whether you feel like it. You simply execute. That creates momentum. And momentum creates identity reinforcement. Every time you keep promises to yourself, self-respect grows. Every time you betray your own standards, self-trust weakens. That is why discipline is deeply emotional. It changes how you see yourself. A disciplined person begins trusting themselves, and self-trust creates confidence. Not fake confidence, grounded confidence, the kind that survives difficulty, the kind that remains steady during uncertainty, the kind that does not collapse from temporary setbacks. Because setbacks are normal. The internet hides this truth. People see polished success stories without witnessing years of invisible struggle underneath. The sleepless nights, the failed attempts, the self-doubt, the rejection, the uncertainty, the emotional battles. But the 1% expect difficulty. That expectation protects them psychologically. Average culture teaches people to expect comfort. Then life shocks them with reality. The wealthy expect resistance. And preparation changes emotional response. Imagine entering a storm knowing storms exist. Very different from believing life should always feel easy. The first mindset adapts. The second complains. Complaining feels emotionally relieving temporarily, but it weakens action long-term. The 1% ask better questions, not, "Why is this happening to me?" but, "What is this teaching me?" That shift creates growth instead of victimhood. Victimhood is emotionally seductive because it removes responsibility. But responsibility creates power, and power creates options. The wealthy value options deeply. The option to leave, the option to choose, the option to pause, the option to think clearly, the option to protect peace. That is why emotional control matters financially. A reactive person becomes easy to manipulate. Advertisers manipulate insecurity. Algorithms manipulate outrage. Politics manipulates fear. Toxic people manipulate emotional weakness. But emotionally disciplined individuals become harder to control. And difficult to control people eventually create freedom. This is why solitude matters too. You need moments alone to hear your own thinking clearly. Otherwise, the world programs your emotions continuously. Noise enters. Comparison enters. Pressure enters. And eventually, your identity becomes externally directed. The 1% regularly disconnect to reconnect with clarity. Because clarity prevents emotional leakage. And emotional leakage destroys focus. Think about how many people ruin productive mornings through emotional distractions before noon. Arguments, scrolling, news, comparison, drama. Their energy becomes fragmented immediately. Then they wonder why consistency feels impossible. Your emotional environment matters. Protect it carefully, especially in a world monetizing your distraction. One of the most powerful financial skills today is emotional patience. The ability to delay gratification, delay applause, delay comfort, delay external evidence. Because compounding requires patience emotionally, and impatient minds sabotage long-term growth constantly. The wealthy understand something painful. Slow progress is still progress. But emotional people quit too early because results feel invisible initially. That is why endurance becomes rare, and rare qualities become valuable. If this chapter resonates deeply, remember this sentence. Your emotions are powerful servants, but dangerous masters. Master them, or they will quietly master your future. And in the next chapter, we are going to explore one of the greatest hidden advantages of the 1%. Why silence, privacy, and focused invisibility often create more power than constant visibility ever could. Chapter 6. The Power of Moving in Silence. The loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful, but modern culture trains people to believe the opposite. Post everything, announce everything, broadcast every goal before it exists. Seek validation before results, and slowly, people become addicted to appearing productive instead of becoming productive. That addiction is dangerous, because attention can feel like progress without creating any. The 1% understand something most people never learn. Silence protects growth. That is why many truly powerful people move quietly, not because they lack ambition, because they understand energy leaks through unnecessary exposure. Every time you announce unfinished goals to the world, something subtle happens psychologically. Part of your brain mistakes talking for accomplishment. You receive emotional satisfaction before doing the actual work, and that weakens urgency. That is why so many people remain trapped in endless preparation mode. Talking, planning, posting, explaining, dreaming publicly, but never building deeply. The wealthy avoid this trap. They understand results speak louder than intentions, and silence creates focus. Think carefully about seeds. Seeds grow underground first, invisible, quiet, uncelebrated. If you dig them up every day searching for proof, you destroy the process. Human transformation works similarly. The beginning stages of growth often look unimpressive externally. Reading while nobody notices. Studying while friends party. Saving while others spend. Practicing while nobody applauds. Waking up early while the world sleeps. The 1% respect this invisible phase. Average culture avoids it because invisible work bruises the ego. People want immediate recognition, immediate proof, immediate applause, but applause can become addictive, and addicted minds lose focus. That is why privacy becomes power. Privacy protects energy, protects concentration, protects emotional stability. When fewer people know your plans, fewer opinions can contaminate your direction. And opinions are dangerous when identity is still developing. A young entrepreneur begins building a small business online. At first it is fragile, uncertain, learning-based. But instead of protecting the process, he announces every step publicly. Friends mock him. Family doubts him. Comparison poisons his confidence. Soon he quits. Not because the dream lacked potential, because his emotional foundation lacked protection. Meanwhile, another person builds quietly, learns quietly, fails quietly, improves quietly. And years later, people suddenly call them an overnight success. No, you simply did not witness the silent years. The wealthy understand this deeply. Most breakthroughs happen privately long before they become visible publicly. That is why they stop needing constant validation. Validation dependence weakens discipline. Because if your motivation depends on applause, consistency disappears when applause fades, and applause always fades eventually. The 1% build internal standards instead, internal discipline, internal expectations, internal accountability. That creates stability. A person driven internally becomes difficult to distract because their purpose no longer depends on public reaction. Modern society rewards visibility aggressively. Algorithms prioritize noise. Outrage spreads faster than wisdom. Drama spreads faster than depth. That is why calm, focused individuals now possess extraordinary advantage. They are not constantly emotionally reacting to external noise. They are building quietly, and quiet building compounds. This applies to finances too. Many people destroy financial progress trying to maintain appearances. Luxury purchases for validation, status spending for attention, performative lifestyles for social approval. But the wealthy understand something painful. Every unnecessary performance drains resources, money, energy, attention, peace. That is why many millionaires look surprisingly ordinary, because real wealth often hides, while fake wealth desperately announces itself. The 1% ask a different question, not, how can I look successful? But how can I become free? That shift changes spending habits immediately. Free people think differently than impressive people. Freedom values peace. Impressiveness values attention. Freedom values flexibility. Impressiveness values appearances. Freedom values ownership. Impressiveness values perception. These are different emotional operating systems entirely. One creates calm, the other creates pressure, and pressure eventually exposes truth. That is why many people secretly feel exhausted maintaining lifestyles they cannot emotionally sustain. They built identity around being seen instead of being grounded. And grounded people move differently. They do not panic when unnoticed temporarily. They do not collapse without validation. They understand seasons. There is a season for learning, a season for building, a season for sacrifice, a season for visibility. But average culture wants visibility before mastery. That destroys depth. Boys, the 1% prioritize competence over attention because competence survives trends. Attention fades quickly. Look at the internet carefully. Thousands of people chasing virality. Few chasing mastery. Thousands chasing fast money. Few building long-term systems. Thousands chasing impressions. Few creating substance. But substance always outlasts performance eventually. Always. This is why emotional maturity matters again. Immature minds crave recognition constantly. Mature minds crave progress. One needs to be seen. The other needs to become. And becoming requires solitude sometimes. You need distance from noise to hear your own thoughts clearly. Otherwise, society slowly programs your desires for you. Suddenly, you are chasing goals you never consciously chose, buying things you do not truly need, comparing yourself to strangers constantly, feeling behind in races you never intended to run. Silence interrupts this manipulation. Silence reconnects you to reality. That is why powerful people often disappear temporarily, not because they are lost, because they are rebuilding, refocusing, strategizing, healing, growing. The world misinterprets silence because most people fear being alone with themselves. Silence exposes unresolved insecurity, exposes lack of direction, exposes emotional dependency, but it also creates clarity, and clarity is priceless. A distracted person cannot build extraordinary things consistently. Depth requires concentration, and concentration requires boundaries. That is why the 1% guard access. Carefully. Guard time carefully. Guard focus carefully. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to your energy. That realization changes relationships too. Some people only appear when you become useful. Some conversations drain ambition. Some environments normalize mediocrity. Some friendships reward stagnation subconsciously. And if you remain constantly exposed to low standards, eventually your standards weaken too. Environment matters more than ego wants to admit. The wealthy know this. That is why they intentionally place themselves around thinkers, builders, disciplined individuals, emotionally stable people. Because energy spreads, mindsets spread, habits spread, fear spreads too. Choose carefully. You become what you repeatedly tolerate. That includes emotional environments. Silence also teaches patience, and patience creates leverage. A person able to delay reaction gains advantage immediately. Imagine two people insulted publicly. One reacts emotionally instantly. The other remains composed, strategic, observant. Who appears powerful? Control creates presence. That applies financially too. The ability to pause before spending, pause before investing emotionally, pause before speaking, pause before quitting. These pauses protect futures, and futures are often destroyed impulsively. The 1% train emotional restraint deliberately, not suppression, restraint. Because not every thought deserves expression, not every feeling deserves action, not every opportunity deserves pursuit. Discernment matters, especially in a distracted world. You cannot build greatness while saying yes to everything. Focus requires elimination, and elimination often feels lonely initially. But temporary loneliness is cheaper than permanent regret. Read that again. Because many people sacrifice their future just to avoid temporary discomfort. The wealthy accept temporary discomfort strategically. They understand seasons of isolation can create decades of freedom. That is a powerful trade. If this chapter resonates with you, remember this sentence carefully. Move quietly until results make introductions unnecessary. That does not mean hiding your light forever. It means protecting the process while it is still fragile. And in the next chapter, we are going to uncover one of the most misunderstood secrets of the 1%. Why discipline, not talent, becomes the true multiplier of wealth, peace, confidence, and long-term freedom. We'd also like to remind you that we have a private members community on our channel. All members can vote on the topic of the next video, have priority in the comments section, and, most importantly, gain access to exclusive videos and lessons covering the most relevant topics and information specific to this month. Thank you. Let's keep moving forward. Chapter 7. Discipline is the real multiplier. Talent can make you impressive for a moment. Discipline can make you unstoppable for a lifetime. That is the difference the 1% understand early. And it is why disciplined people often surpass naturally gifted people over time. Because talent without structure collapses under pressure. But discipline keeps moving even when emotions disappear. That is real power. Most people romanticize motivation because motivation feels exciting. But motivation is unstable. Some mornings it exists. Some mornings it vanishes completely. If your future depends on feeling inspired every day, your future becomes fragile. The wealthy never build fragile systems. They build reliable ones. And discipline is reliability. It is the ability to continue after excitement fades, continue after rejection, continue after boredom, continue after slow progress, continue after nobody notices. That is why discipline compounds into extraordinary outcomes over long periods. Because most people quit emotionally long before results arrive. The 1% expect this. They know the beginning of transformation usually feels invisible, uncomfortable, unrewarded. A person starts going to the gym consistently. At first, nothing dramatic changes. The mirror barely responds. Energy fluctuates. Doubt whispers. But disciplined repetition slowly reshapes identity. Months later, posture changes. Confidence changes. Self-respect changes. Years later, the entire life trajectory changes, not because of one workout, because of repetition. Wealth works the same way. One investment rarely changes a life. One focused day rarely changes a life. One disciplined decision rarely changes a life. But repeated discipline creates momentum, and momentum becomes identity. Identity becomes destiny. That is the real multiplier. The average person underestimates the power of ordinary habits repeated consistently. Because modern culture glorifies dramatic breakthroughs, viral moments, fast success, instant transformation. But real life rarely changes that way. Real life changes quietly, slowly, brick by brick. The wealthy trust this process emotionally. Average culture resists it because patience feels uncomfortable. People want proof immediately. But compounding hides itself in the beginning. That is why disciplined people often appear ordinary until suddenly they are not. A man spends 6 years mastering sales communication after work every evening, while friends spend evenings escaping reality through entertainment. At first, nothing looks different. Same apartment, same city, same life externally, but internally, different future forming quietly. 6 years later, one person negotiates opportunities globally. The other still complains about circumstances. Same starting point, different repetition. That is discipline. And discipline is not punishment. This is important. Many people misunderstand discipline emotionally. They associate it with suffering, restriction, misery. But true discipline is self-respect, expressed through behavior. Every disciplined action says, "My future matters." Every disciplined action reinforces identity. You begin seeing yourself differently, you trust yourself more, and self-trust changes everything, because many people secretly lack confidence, not from lack of ability, but from broken promises to themselves. They say they will start tomorrow. Tomorrow arrives, nothing changes, again and again and again. Eventually, the subconscious stops believing them. Self-trust weakens, confidence weakens, identity weakens. Discipline repairs this slowly. Every time you follow through despite discomfort, your mind receives evidence. I can rely on myself. That internal stability becomes priceless, especially during difficult seasons. The 1% understand difficult seasons are guaranteed. Economic downturns, failures, rejection, unexpected setbacks, emotional pain, health challenges, pressure. Nobody escapes struggle permanently, but disciplined individuals navigate difficulty differently because systems remain when emotions fluctuate. That is why routines matter. Morning routines, financial routines, health routines, learning routines, reflection routines. These systems reduce chaos, and chaos destroys consistency. The wealthy simplify decision-making intentionally. They automate positive behaviors. Why? Because relying on willpower alone is dangerous. Willpower weakens under stress. Systems survive stress better. A distracted, emotional person constantly negotiates with themselves. Maybe tomorrow, maybe later, maybe when I feel ready. Disciplined individuals reduce negotiation. They act according to standards, not moods, and standards create structure. Structure creates momentum. Momentum creates results. Most people fail not because goals are impossible, but because inconsistency keeps resetting progress. Imagine trying to fill a bucket while punching holes in it daily. That is how many people live. Periods of motivation followed by collapse. Progress followed by self-sabotage. Focus followed by distraction. The 1% avoid emotional extremes. They understand sustainability matters more than intensity. Small disciplined actions repeated for years outperform occasional bursts of motivation. Always. That truth feels boring to some people, but boring systems often create extraordinary lives because extraordinary outcomes usually hide inside ordinary repeated behaviors. Wake up early consistently, read consistently, invest consistently, train consistently, reflect consistently, protect focus consistently, speak carefully consistently, control emotions consistently. These actions look small daily, but years later, they become impossible to ignore. The wealthy think long-term emotionally. That is another hidden advantage. Most people sacrifice tomorrow for temporary comfort today. The 1% sacrifice temporary comfort strategically for long-term freedom. That trade creates separation. Discipline also protects peace. A financially disciplined person experiences less panic. A physically disciplined person experiences more energy. An emotionally disciplined person experiences less chaos. A mentally disciplined person experiences more clarity. Everything connects. That is why discipline creates confidence naturally, not fake confidence built from appearance. Real confidence built from evidence. Evidence that you can endure discomfort. Evidence that you can continue despite uncertainty. Evidence that you can control impulses. Evidence that you can build yourself intentionally. That confidence becomes magnetic. People trust disciplined individuals more because reliability creates credibility, and credibility creates opportunity. The world rewards dependable people eventually, not instantly, eventually. That is why patience matters again. Modern culture trains short attention spans emotionally, but wealth requires long-term thinking. So does mastery. So does meaningful relationships. So does health. Everything valuable compounds slowly, and slow growth frustrates impatient minds. That is why many people quit right before transformation begins. The gym feels pointless after 3 weeks. The business feels pointless after 6 months. The content feels pointless after 1 year. The savings feel insignificant initially, but compounding is deceptive. Tiny improvements eventually create exponential differences. 1% better daily sounds small until you calculate years. That is the 1% code. Tiny disciplined improvements repeated relentlessly, not perfection, consistency. Perfectionism destroys action. Discipline embraces repetition. A perfectionist waits emotionally. A disciplined person progresses imperfectly, and progress always beats paralysis. This matters deeply in 2026 because distraction has become normalized. People struggle to focus for even 30 uninterrupted minutes now. Notifications interrupt thought constantly. Entertainment floods every empty moment. Patience weakens. Attention weakens. But disciplined focus becomes more valuable every year. A person capable of deep work while others remain distracted gains extraordinary advantage because focus creates leverage, and leverage multiplies results. The wealthy train focus intentionally. They understand concentration is a superpower in overstimulated societies. That is why they protect mornings, protect routines, protect sleep, protect energy. Because exhausted minds make weak decisions, and weak decisions compound too. Everything compounds. That sentence alone should change how you live. Bad habits compound. Debt compounds. Stress compounds. Distraction compounds. So does discipline. So does peace. So does learning. So does patience. Your life is already compounding in some direction. The question is, toward freedom or toward dependence? That question matters because years pass whether you build intentionally or not. Time compounds everything automatically. The 1% simply become conscious of this earlier than most people. And consciousness changes behavior. Behavior changes outcomes. Outcomes change identity. Identity changes generations. If this chapter resonates deeply, remember this sentence. Discipline is remembering what you want most instead of choosing what feels good now. That single principle can transform finances, health, relationships, mindset, and future simultaneously. And in the next chapter, we are going to explore one of the most important but overlooked truths about wealth. Why your environment silently shapes your standards, your ambition, your discipline, and ultimately your destiny. Chapter 8. Your environment is programming you. Most people think they make decisions independently, but if you look closely at your habits, your mindset, your standards, your energy, and even your ambitions, you will discover something uncomfortable. Your environment has been shaping you quietly for years. The people around you, the conversations around you, the media around you, the expectations around you, the emotional patterns around you, everything influences identity. And identity influences destiny. That is why the 1% become extremely intentional about environment, because they understand a truth average culture ignores. You slowly become what you repeatedly tolerate. That sentence alone can wake someone up completely. Look carefully at your life. What behaviors are normal around you? Complaining, excuses, distraction, financial irresponsibility, constant drama, victim thinking, low standards? So because normalization is powerful. If unhealthy behavior surrounds you long enough, eventually it stops looking unhealthy. And that is dangerous. A person surrounded by negativity long enough begins shrinking their ambition unconsciously. A person surrounded by discipline begins elevating naturally. Energy spreads, mindset spread, fear spreads too. The wealthy understand this deeply. That is why they protect proximity carefully. Not from arrogance, from awareness, because environments either pull greatness out of you or quietly drain it. There are people who leave conversations energized, focused, inspired, sharper. And there are people who leave conversations exhausted, confused, doubtful, emotionally heavy. Pay attention to that difference. It matters more than most people realize. The average person chooses environments emotionally. The 1% choose environment strategically. That changes futures. Imagine two young women beginning adulthood. One surrounds herself constantly with people obsessed with gossip, appearances, and immediate pleasure. The other spends time around disciplined thinkers, builders, readers, emotionally grounded people. 5 years later, their realities no longer resembled each other. One normalized chaos, the other normalized growth. Environment became destiny. That is why changing your life sometimes requires changing your proximity. And that feels painful initially, because growth often creates separation. You begin noticing conversations differently. Certain environments start feeling heavy. Certain habits start feeling destructive. Certain friendships start feeling stagnant. Not because you became superior, because awareness increased, and awareness changes tolerance. The 1% understand something emotionally difficult. Not everyone can come with you into your next season. That truth hurts, but it is real. Some people are committed to remaining average emotionally, committed to complaining, committed to excuses, committed to distraction, committed to avoiding responsibility. And if you stay immersed in those mindsets long enough, eventually your own standards weaken too. This is why protecting mental environment matters so much today, especially in 2026, because modern environments no longer exist only physically. Digital environments shape identity constantly now. The content you consume daily becomes psychological nutrition. What enters your mind repeatedly eventually influences behavior. If you consume outrage constantly, peace disappears. If you consume comparison constantly, gratitude weakens. If you consume distraction constantly, focus deteriorates. If you consume negativity constantly, ambition shrinks. People underestimate how much information affects emotional state. The wealthy do not. That is why many successful people become selective about what they consume mentally. Selective about news, selective about entertainment, selective about social media, selective about attention itself, because attention is life force. And your mind cannot flourish in toxic environments continuously. A person trying to build discipline while drowning in distraction faces unnecessary resistance. A person trying to build confidence while surrounded by mockery faces unnecessary resistance. A person trying to create peace while immersed in chaos faces unnecessary resistance. Environment matters, not completely, but significantly. This is why physical spaces matter too. The condition of your room affects your thinking. The condition of your body affects your energy. The condition of your schedule affects your clarity. Everything influences everything. The 1% know this intuitively. That is why they build environments supporting their goals instead of sabotaging them. Systems matter more than motivation, and environment shapes systems. A healthy kitchen reduces unhealthy decisions. A clean workspace reduces mental friction. A disciplined social circle normalizes growth. A focused morning routine strengthens emotional control. Design matters. People who rely entirely on willpower eventually burn out. The wealthy reduce unnecessary temptation strategically. That is wisdom, not weakness. Most people overestimate personal strength and underestimate environmental influence, but psychology proves this repeatedly. Humans adapt. That adaptation can elevate you or quietly destroy your potential. A man trying to stop overspending continues surrounding himself with people obsessed with luxury validation. Every weekend becomes pressure. Pressure creates emotional spending. Emotional spending delays freedom. Another man changes environment gradually. Different conversations, different priorities, different influences. Eventually, discipline becomes easier because surroundings reinforce it. Environment either strengthens your future or weakens it invisibly. That is why solitude sometimes becomes necessary. Not permanent isolation, intentional distance, distance from noise, distance from pressure, distance from emotional contamination. The wealthy value solitude because solitude restores clarity, and clarity restores direction. Most people are overstimulated, not lost. There is a difference. When the mind finally becomes quiet, truth surfaces. You realize what actually matters, what actually drains you, what actually inspires you, what actually deserves your energy. Silence reveals reality. That is why so many people avoid it. Noise distracts from self-confrontation, but self-confrontation is where transformation begins. The 1% regularly evaluate their environment honestly. Who sharpens me? Who drains me? What habits surround me? What standards surround me? What conversations dominate my life? Because repeated exposure creates normalization, and normalization shapes destiny. This applies financially too. If everyone around you spends emotionally, discipline feels strange. If everyone around you complains about successful people, ambition feels dangerous. If everyone around you avoids accountability, responsibility feels uncomfortable. But if growth surrounds you consistently, elevation becomes natural. That is why proximity matters more than motivation sometimes. You absorb standards unconsciously. A focused environment strengthens focus. A distracted environment weakens it. A peaceful environment strengthens clarity. A chaotic environment weakens emotional stability. Everything is contagious, especially energy. That is why protecting peace becomes essential, not optional. Essential. Peace improves decision-making, improves health, improves consistency, improves relationships, improves creativity. A constantly stressed mind struggles to build long-term wealth because survival thinking narrows perception. The 1% intentionally reduce unnecessary chaos, not because life becomes perfect, because clarity creates leverage, and leverage multiplies outcomes. Look carefully at the world. Many people consume emotional poison daily, then wonder why motivation disappears. Toxic content, toxic relationships, toxic conversations, toxic habits. Eventually, the nervous system becomes exhausted. Exhausted people make impulsive decisions. Impulsive decisions create unstable futures. That is why inner peace is productive. A calm nervous system sees opportunities more clearly, responds more strategically, builds more consistently. That is real power. The wealthy also understand one painful truth. Sometimes, your old environment only understands the old version of you. And when you start evolving, resistance appears, mockery appears, doubt appears. People become uncomfortable when your growth exposes their stagnation. Do not take it personally. Most criticism is projection wearing conversation clothes. Stay respectful, but stay focused, because every meaningful transformation requires emotional courage. The courage to outgrow patterns, outgrow environments, outgrow limitations, outgrow old identities. And identity shifts always feel uncomfortable before they feel empowering. That discomfort is normal. Do not fear it. Use it. One powerful environment shift can accelerate your future dramatically. One mentor, one book, one disciplined friend group, one peaceful routine, one healthy relationship, one focused season. Everything can change because humans adapt faster than they realize. The question is, what are you adapting to daily? Chaos or clarity, excuses or ownership, distraction or discipline? That answer matters enormously because your future is being programmed right now by what surrounds you repeatedly. If this chapter resonates deeply, remember this sentence. Your environment whispers instructions to your identity every single day. Choose carefully what voices surround your future. And in the next chapter, we are going to uncover why the 1% obsess over one thing most people completely ignore. The ability to think long-term in a world addicted to immediacy. Dear viewers, write which city you're from. It's interesting to see which corners of the world are watching our videos. Chapter 9. The people who win think in decades. Most people destroy their future for temporary comfort. Not intentionally, habitually, emotionally, unconsciously. Because modern society trains short-term thinking from childhood. Fast entertainment, fast food, fast validation, fast reactions, fast dopamine. Everything immediate, everything urgent, everything designed to keep people emotionally attached to the present moment without thinking deeply about consequences. And that is exactly why long-term thinkers quietly dominate over time. The 1% understands something average culture ignores. A person who can think clearly 10 years ahead gains an almost unfair advantage in a distracted world. Because most people cannot even stay focused for 10 minutes without reaching for stimulation. That is the environment we live in now. Attention fractured, patience weakened, depth replaced by speed. But wealth, real wealth, requires long-term vision. So does mastery. So does emotional stability. So does freedom. Everything meaningful compounds slowly. That truth frustrates impatient minds. And impatient minds sabotage themselves constantly. The average person asks, how fast can I get results? The 1% ask, how strong can I become over time? Different questions, different futures. One mindset seeks immediate evidence. The other builds enduring foundations. And foundations matter because storms eventually arrive for everyone. Economic storms, emotional storms, relationship storms, health storms, identity storms. The people who survive long-term are rarely the fastest starters. They are the most consistent builders. That is why the wealthy think in decades, because decades reward patience brutally. Imagine planting 2 trees. One person digs up the roots every week, checking for progress. The other waters quietly for years. Who eventually receives shade? Compounding rewards endurance. But modern culture makes endurance emotionally difficult because everything constantly competes for your attention. Notifications interrupt thought. Entertainment interrupts reflection. Comparison interrupts gratitude. Algorithms interrupt peace. People now struggle to sit still long enough to think strategically about their own life. That is dangerous because a distracted person becomes reactive. And reactive people rarely build extraordinary futures intentionally. They drift emotionally from impulse to impulse, trend to trend, crisis to crisis. The 1% resist, drift. That is one of their greatest hidden advantages. They know direction matters more than speed. A focused person moving slowly toward the right destination eventually surpasses a distracted person sprinting nowhere. Read that again, carefully, because many people mistake movement for progress. Busy schedules, constant activity, endless urgency. But activity without alignment creates exhaustion, not freedom. The wealthy ask different questions regularly. What am I building? What compounds here? Will this matter in 5 years? Will this decision strengthen or weaken future me? Average culture rarely pauses long enough for those questions, and without reflection, people unconsciously build lives they never intentionally chose. That is why awareness matters again. Awareness interrupts unconscious repetition. Most people repeat emotional cycles because they never examine patterns deeply. Same habits, same excuses, same distractions, same fears, same environments. Then years later, they call it bad luck. But the 1% know repeated behavior creates predictable outcomes. That is why they become obsessed with small daily standards, not dramatic moments. Standards, wake-up standards, health standards, financial standards, communication standards, focus standards, learning standards, because repeated standards become identity, and identity compounds across decades. A woman in South Korea spends 15 years consistently learning emerging technologies while friends constantly chase quick entertainment and easy comfort. At first, nobody notices anything unusual. Years later, she possesses rare expertise, financial leverage, confidence, and freedom. Why? Long-term thinking. Another person changes direction every 6 months, chasing trends emotionally. No depth, no mastery, no consistency. Years pass. Nothing compounds. That is the cost of short-term thinking. The 1% understand boredom differently too. Most people abandon things once excitement disappears. But mastery often begins after excitement fades, when repetition starts, when difficulty appears, when progress slows. That is where separation happens. The average person seeks novelty constantly. The wealthy seek refinement. Refinement compounds. One improves communication slightly every year. Another improves financial intelligence slightly every year. Another improves emotional regulation slightly every year. Years later, these tiny refinements become extraordinary advantages because tiny improvements multiplied by time become massive. That is why time matters more than intensity. An intense month rarely changes a life permanently. A disciplined decade does. The problem is, most people emotionally underestimate time. They think they have more of it than they actually do. So they delay action, delay learning, delay healing, delay discipline, delay difficult conversations, delay dreams, and eventually delay becomes identity. The 1% avoid this trap by remembering something uncomfortable regularly. Life moves faster than emotions realize. One day you are 20, then suddenly 35, then suddenly your parents' age. Your body changes, your opportunities narrow, your time feels more visible. That awareness sharpens priorities. At least it should. Because nothing creates clarity faster than understanding life is temporary. Temporary pain becomes easier to endure. Temporary embarrassment becomes less frightening. Temporary sacrifice becomes more meaningful. Long-term thinkers tolerate short-term discomfort because they understand future consequences. Average culture reverses this. People avoid short-term discomfort, then suffer long-term regret. That trade destroys potential quietly. The wealthy also understand delayed gratification emotionally. A child spends everything immediately. An adult builds patiently. That principle applies everywhere, financially, emotionally, spiritually. A person who cannot delay impulses struggles to create lasting freedom. Impulse spending destroys wealth. Impulse reactions destroy relationships. Impulse decisions destroy consistency. The ability to pause becomes leverage, and leverage multiplies outcomes. This is why the 1% value routines so heavily. Routines reduce emotional decision fatigue. You stop negotiating with yourself constantly. You simply follow systems aligned with long-term goals. That creates stability, and stability compounds. People often ask why disciplined individuals seem calmer. Because clarity reduces chaos. A person aligned with long-term vision panics less during temporary setbacks. They understand seasons. Winter does not mean the tree is dead. Slow growth does not mean growth is absent. Temporary invisibility does not mean failure. That emotional perspective protects endurance. The average person quits emotionally when rewards become delayed. The wealthy continue because they trust compounding. That trust changes everything. Imagine investing small amounts consistently for 20 years. Initially, progress looks meaningless. Then suddenly, compounding accelerates dramatically. Human identity works the same way. So does skill development. So does emotional mastery. So does health. Everything compounds, positive or negative. That sentence should echo in your mind constantly. Every distraction compounds. Every focused hour compounds. Every unhealthy habit compounds. Every disciplined routine compounds. You are already compounding in some direction. The question is whether you are conscious of it. That awareness separates builders from drifters. The 1% build intentionally. That does not mean life becomes easy. It means direction becomes clearer, and clear direction reduces wasted years. Most people do not need more motivation. They need more perspective. Perspective changes decisions. A person thinking only about tonight spends differently than a person thinking about 10 years. A person thinking only emotionally reacts differently than a person thinking strategically. Long-term thinking creates emotional maturity. You stop needing immediate applause, immediate proof, immediate recognition. You become willing to build quietly because you understand invisible progress is still progress. That mindset becomes rare in distracted societies. And rare mindsets create rare outcomes. This is why the wealthy protect mornings carefully too. Mornings shape momentum. Momentum shapes identity. Identity shapes future decades. A reactive morning often creates a reactive day. A focused morning often creates intentional momentum. Small patterns matter more than dramatic moments. The world glamorizes breakthrough moments. But breakthroughs are usually built on invisible routines nobody applauds. Years of repetition hidden underneath one visible result. That is the truth people rarely see online. You are witnessing highlights, not foundations. And if you compare your behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel, discouragement becomes inevitable. The 1% avoid emotional comparison because comparison destroys focus. Focus creates compounding. Compounding creates leverage. Leverage creates freedom. Everything connects. If this chapter resonates deeply, remember this sentence. The future belongs to people who can stay focused long after excitement fades. That is where real separation begins. And in the next chapter, we are going to uncover one of the most dangerous hidden addictions sabotaging modern lives. The addiction to comfort, and why comfort quietly destroys ambition, discipline, courage, and financial freedom over time. Chapter 10. Comfort is the silent killer of potential. Most people are not destroyed by failure. They are destroyed by comfort, slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. Because comfort does not feel dangerous in the moment. It feels safe, pleasant, convenient. That is why it becomes addictive. And addiction to comfort creates weak futures. The 1% understands something emotionally difficult. Growth and comfort rarely coexist for long. One always demands sacrifice from the other. You cannot become stronger while avoiding difficulty constantly. You cannot become financially free while emotionally dependent on convenience. You cannot build an extraordinary life while worshiping comfort every day. That truth is uncomfortable. But truth often is. Look carefully at modern society. People seek comfort immediately the moment discomfort appears. Stress, escape into entertainment, loneliness, escape into distraction, boredom, escape into scrolling, fear, escape into procrastination, emotional pain, escape into consumption. Everything becomes escape, and eventually escape becomes identity. That is the hidden crisis of modern life. People are no longer training resilience. They are training avoidance. And avoided discomfort compounds into weakness. The wealthy understand discomfort differently. They do not chase suffering unnecessarily, but they stop running from difficulty. Because they know discomfort often contains transformation. The uncomfortable workout builds strength. The uncomfortable conversation repairs relationships. The uncomfortable discipline creates freedom. The uncomfortable risk creates opportunity. The uncomfortable silence creates clarity. Everything valuable asks for discomfort first. That is the entrance fee. The average person interprets discomfort as danger. The 1% interpret discomfort as growth potential. That difference changes everything. A young man wants financial freedom, but avoids learning sales because rejection feels uncomfortable. Years pass. Income remains limited. Another man embraces rejection repeatedly until communication becomes skill. Years later, confidence becomes leverage. Different relationship with discomfort, different future. Comfort keeps people emotionally small, and emotional smallness creates limited lives. Because the moment challenge appears, comfort-trained minds retreat. They quit quickly, avoid quickly, distract quickly, blame quickly. But disciplined individuals build endurance through repeated discomfort exposure. That endurance becomes confidence. Not fake confidence built through appearance, real confidence built through survival. Every difficult thing you survive expands identity slightly. You realize, I can handle more than I thought. That realization becomes power. The 1% intentionally practice difficult things, not because they enjoy pain, because difficulty sharpens character. Waking early, training consistently, studying deeply, investing patiently, saying no to impulsive pleasures. These behaviors train emotional strength, and emotional strength creates freedom. Weak impulses create expensive lives. That sentence matters. Many people destroy financial futures through emotional comfort seeking. Impulse shopping after stressful days. Luxury spending for validation. Constant entertainment replacing skill development. Convenience replacing discipline. Short-term relief replacing long-term vision. Comfort quietly steals decades this way, and society normalizes it because convenience sells extraordinarily well. Everywhere you look, systems are designed to reduce discomfort instantly. Food delivered immediately. Entertainment endlessly available. Validation accessible within seconds online. Attention constantly stimulated. Patience weakens in this environment, and weakened patience destroys compounding, because compounding requires waiting emotionally. The wealthy become comfortable being uncomfortable temporarily. That is one of their greatest hidden advantages. They can tolerate delayed gratification, delayed recognition, delayed pleasure, delayed results. That emotional endurance separates them from average thinking. Most people overestimate how painful discipline is and underestimate how painful regret becomes later. Regret compounds too. Imagine someone spending 10 years avoiding discomfort, avoiding difficult conversations, avoiding health responsibility, avoiding financial discipline, avoiding skill development. At first, life feels easier emotionally. Then suddenly, anxiety grows, dependence grows, health weakens, confidence weakens, options disappear. That is delayed pain, comfort, charged interest. The 1% understand life always collects payment, either now through discipline or later through regret. Choose carefully. One creates strength, the other creates suffering. Comfort also destroys ambition quietly. A person constantly overstimulated loses hunger gradually. Too much entertainment weakens urgency. Too much convenience weakens creativity. Too much ease weakens resilience. This is why some people secretly feel numb despite modern luxury. Their nervous system became addicted to stimulation while disconnected from meaning. Meaning often lives on the other side of effort. Building something, learning something, serving something larger than immediate pleasure. That creates fulfillment. Comfort creates sedation temporarily, different things entirely. The wealthy understand purpose matters more than endless pleasure, because endless pleasure eventually becomes emptiness. Humans need challenge, need progress, need meaning, need growth. Without growth, stagnation enters, and stagnation slowly creates emotional decay. That is why disciplined people often appear more alive emotionally. They are moving forward intentionally. Forward movement creates energy. Avoidance drains it. Think about your own life honestly. What discomfort are you avoiding right now? A conversation, a financial decision, a health commitment, a business idea, a creative project, a necessary ending, a new beginning? Because avoided discomfort usually becomes larger over time. Problems ignored rarely shrink. The 1% face reality earlier. That is another hidden advantage. Reality faced early hurts less than reality delayed. Financial problems addressed early are manageable. Health problems addressed early are manageable. Relationship problems addressed early are manageable. Avoidance magnifies consequences, and comfort fuels avoidance. This is why self-respect matters again. A self-respecting person chooses difficult actions because future well-being matters more than temporary emotion. That is maturity, not age, maturity. Many adults remain emotionally controlled by comfort. They know what would improve life, but they avoid it because immediate feelings dominate decisions. The wealthy train themselves differently. They ask, what serves my future best? Not, what feels easiest right now? That single question can transform an entire existence. Because easy decisions compound too. Sleeping in compounds, overspending compounds, distracting yourself compounds, complaining compounds, everything compounds. You are either training discipline or training weakness daily, whether you notice it or not. The 1% become intentional about this. That is why they often seem calmer under pressure. Pressure no longer shocks them emotionally because they practice discomfort voluntarily. Cold mornings, long work sessions, delayed rewards, hard conversations, calculated risks. Discipline builds emotional calluses, and emotional calluses create resilience. Resilience matters enormously in modern society because uncertainty continues increasing globally. Technology shifts rapidly. Economies change rapidly. Industries evolve rapidly. People emotionally dependent on comfort struggle in uncertain environments. Adaptable, disciplined individuals thrive because adaptability requires tolerance for discomfort. Every new level of life requires unfamiliarity. Unfamiliarity feels uncomfortable initially, but if discomfort automatically triggers retreat, growth becomes impossible. The wealthy understand this deeply. That is why they become lifelong learners. Learning itself is uncomfortable. Being inexperienced feels uncomfortable. Starting over feels uncomfortable. But refusing growth eventually becomes far more painful. Read that again. Because many people cling to familiar suffering simply because unfamiliar growth feels scary. A toxic relationship feels familiar. A limiting job feels familiar. A distracted lifestyle feels familiar. But familiarity is not freedom. Sometimes it is simply well-decorated stagnation. The 1% choose expansion repeatedly, and expansion demands courage. Not loud courage, quiet courage. The courage to continue when nobody understands your vision yet. The courage to invest in yourself before external proof exists. The courage to delay gratification. The courage to walk away from draining environments. The courage to become different. That courage changes everything. If this chapter resonates deeply, remember this sentence carefully. Comfort makes today easier, but tomorrow harder. Discipline makes today harder, but tomorrow easier. That is the trade almost every human life revolves around. And in the next chapter, we are going to uncover why focus has become one of the rarest and most valuable skills on earth, and why people who master attention will dominate the future financially, emotionally, and mentally. Chapter 11, Focus is the New Superpower. There was a time when physical labor created the greatest advantage. Then knowledge became power. But now, in a world flooded with endless information, constant distraction, and non-stop stimulation, focus has become one of the rarest and most valuable abilities on earth. And the 1% know it. That is why they protect attention more aggressively than most people protect money because they understand something modern society keeps hiding. Where your attention goes repeatedly, your life follows. That sentence should echo in your mind every morning because attention is not just concentration. Attention is energy, identity, direction, life force itself. And right now, millions of people are losing control of it every single day without realizing the cost. Notifications interrupt thought. Algorithms interrupt peace. Entertainment interrupts purpose. Comparison interrupts confidence. And slowly, people lose the ability to think deeply, to sit still, to reflect, to create, to build, to endure silence without stimulation. That is dangerous because shallow attention creates shallow lives. The 1% understand this deeply. That is why focused individuals quietly dominate distracted environments. A person who can concentrate intensely for 3 uninterrupted hours now possesses an extraordinary competitive advantage, not because the task became easier, because everyone else became fragmented. Look around honestly. Most people cannot even watch a 5-minute video without checking another screen, cannot read 10 pages without distraction, cannot sit quietly without reaching for stimulation. Attention spans are collapsing. And collapsing attention destroys long-term thinking. That is exactly why focus has become leverage. The ability to direct your mind intentionally while others drift emotionally is power. Real power. Financial power. Emotional power. Creative power. The wealthy train focus deliberately because they understand focused energy compounds faster than scattered effort. 1 hour of deep, concentrated work often produces more value than 8 distracted hours. But distraction feels normal. Now, that is the problem. People no longer realize how fragmented their thinking has become. The brain constantly switching between notifications, messages, entertainment, fear, comparison, and noise eventually loses depth. And depth creates mastery. You cannot build extraordinary things with a constantly interrupted mind. A distracted person starts many things. A focused person finishes them. That difference changes entire futures. A young programmer in Canada spends 2 uninterrupted hours every morning mastering artificial intelligence systems, while competitors spend mornings reacting emotionally to notifications and news. 5 years later, different universe. One built rare skills, the other built distraction tolerance. Same internet, different focus. The 1% understand that attention is now an economic battlefield. Every app wants your time. Every platform wants your emotions. Every algorithm wants your nervous system engaged constantly because distracted people are easier to influence, easier to sell to, easier to manipulate. A calm, focused person becomes dangerous to systems built on emotional impulsiveness. That is why protecting attention is no longer optional. It is survival. The average person wakes up and immediately gives their mind away. Phone first, notifications first, external noise first, before their own thoughts even exist. And then they wonder why anxiety follows them throughout the day. Because reactive mornings create reactive identities. The wealthy reverse this. They create mental space before external influence enters. Silence, reading, planning, training, thinking, reflection, focus before noise. That sequence matters enormously because your first thoughts often shape emotional momentum for the entire day. Momentum compounds. Everything compounds. Remember that. Focus also creates emotional stability. A distracted mind becomes emotionally fragile. Why? Because constant stimulation overloads the nervous system. Too much information, too much comparison, too much urgency, too much noise. Eventually, the mind loses clarity, and unclear minds make poor decisions, financially, emotionally, relationally. That is why calm, focused individuals often appear more powerful. Not because life became easier for them, because mental discipline strengthened. A focused mind sees opportunities more clearly, patterns more clearly, solutions more clearly. Distraction hides opportunities. Focus reveals them. The 1% intentionally remove unnecessary noise because they understand subtraction creates power. Not every opportunity deserves attention. Not every opinion deserves emotional response. Not every trend deserves participation. Discernment matters, especially today. People think productivity means doing more. The wealthy understand productivity often means eliminating more. Eliminating distractions, eliminating chaos, eliminating unnecessary obligations, eliminating emotional leakage. Because every unnecessary yes steals focus from something meaningful. That is why boundaries matter. You cannot protect your future while giving unlimited access to your energy. The wealthy also understand the danger of external validation. The moment your happiness depends on public approval, your freedom weakens. You become emotionally controlled by perception. That is exhausting, and exhaustion destroys clarity. This is why many celebrities, influencers, and high-status individuals still feel empty internally. Attention is not peace. Visibility is not fulfillment. Luxury is not emotional stability. The 1% seek alignment instead. Enough wealth to reduce stress. Enough discipline to protect peace. Enough clarity to stay grounded. Enough freedom to choose intentionally. That balance creates sustainability, because unsustainable lifestyles eventually collapse emotionally, and emotional collapse usually arrives quietly before financial collapse becomes visible. Stress, burnout, anxiety, constant pressure, identity confusion. The nervous system eventually reveals what appearances hide. That is why inner peace becomes priceless. A peaceful person needs less external validation, needs less performance, needs less proving, and people who stop trying to prove themselves often become financially stronger over time. Because proving is expensive, building is profitable. Those are different lifestyles entirely. This is why humility matters too. A humble person can learn continuously. An ego-driven person defends appearances constantly. Defensiveness blocks growth. Humility accelerates it. The wealthy stay teachable. That teachability compounds. A person obsessed with looking smart stops improving. A person willing to look inexperienced temporarily eventually develops mastery. Again, temporary discomfort creates long-term freedom. Temporary ego protection creates long-term stagnation. The trade appears everywhere. The 1% choose future freedom over present performance repeatedly. That is why they often seem boring during the building years. While others spend money proving success externally, they are quietly reducing future dependence internally. And eventually, that difference becomes impossible to hide. One person owns peace, the other owns pressure. One person can walk away from toxic situations. The other cannot afford to stop performing. That is not freedom. That is emotional captivity decorated with luxury. Never confuse the two. If this chapter resonates deeply, remember this sentence carefully. The moment you stop trying to impress everyone, you finally create space to build yourself honestly. That realization can change your financial future permanently. And in the next chapter, we are going to uncover why the 1% value emotional stability more than excitement, and why calm, consistent people often outperform highly emotional people in every area of life.